So, have you ever heard the name Sybil Ludington? Her story is one of the great tales of the American Revolution, all about incredible daring and bravery. But you have to wonder how much of it is real history and how much is, well, just a great legend. Today we're going to find out. She gets called the female Paul Revere all the time. And this statue, it really captures that powerful image we all have of her, right? A young woman riding like mad through the night, all for the cause of freedom. But where did this story even come from? Let's dig into the tale behind this image. All right, let's start with the legend of Sybil Ludington itself. This is the story that's been told for generations in books, poems. She was even on a postage stamp. Okay, so picture this. It's a dark, rainy night, April 1777. A messenger, totally exhausted, collapses at the home of a Colonel Henry Ludington. And the news is bad. The British are burning Danbury, Connecticut, which was a huge supply depot for the Continental Army. Now, the colonel's got 400 militiamen, but they're all scattered for miles around. He needs to rally them, and fast. But who could possibly make that dangerous ride? Well, his 16-year-old daughter, Sybil, steps up. And this is where the story just becomes incredible. Through the pitch-black, rainy night, Sybil supposedly rides a staggering 40 miles. Now, to put that in perspective, that's more than double the distance of Paul Revere's famous ride. She's banging on doors, shouting the alarm, just a lone teenager against the storm. The story goes that by dawn, she's rallied almost the entire militia and they march off to fight the British. A true American hero. But is any of it actually true? Because here's the thing, when you start to dust off the actual history books and look for accounts from that time, you find nothing. A strange, total silence. You'd think if a 16-year-old girl saved the day, somebody, somewhere, would have written it down. Just look at this timeline. The ride is supposed to have happened in 1777, but the very first time it ever shows up in print is in 1880. That's 103 years later, in a book by a local historian. The only other early mention is a tiny one in her father's memoirs, which were published by his family long after he died. And that, right there, is the central mystery we have to solve. Why was there absolutely no mention of this ride for more than a century? No letters, no diaries, no newspaper reports, zilch. If she was such a hero, why was she a secret one for so long? So, okay, let's really dig into the evidence from the period. What can we actually find in the historical record? And, maybe more importantly, what does the lack of evidence tell us? When you put the legend side by side with the record, the cracks really start to show. No accounts from the time, nothing in her own letters. But of all the missing pieces, the most telling one might be her pension application from 1838. See, years later when she applied for a widow's pension based on her husband's military service, she gave a really detailed account of her life during the war. Now, if she had made this heroic 40-mile ride, wouldn't she have mentioned it then? It's basically the historical equivalent of a smoking gun. And you know, newspapers from the time tell a totally different story. This report from the New York Gazette, published just a few weeks after the raid, says that an express, which is an official military messenger, was sent by a general to warn everyone. This suggests there was already a formal warning system in place, which makes a last-ditch riot by a teenager seem, well, a lot less likely to have been the main alarm. And it's not just modern historians. Even groups dedicated to this stuff have weighed in. The Daughters of the American Revolution, their whole mission is to honor Revolutionary War patriots. They investigated the claim. And their conclusion? In 1996, they officially stated that the historical proof just wasn't there. For an organization like the DAR, that's a huge deal. Okay, so if the story doesn't really hold up to scrutiny, how in the world did Sybil Ludington become such a famous name? How did a century of silence turn into this roaring legend? Well, this is where the real story begins. So after those first couple of mentions in some old books, the story pretty much went dormant until the 1930s. That's when New York State, looking to boost tourism, decided to put up historical markers along a completely guessed-at route for her ride. Then, a popular poem in 1940 romanticized the whole thing for a national audience, and after that, the legend just snowballed. Then, in 1961, this amazing bronze statue was unveiled, and this was a game changer. It's one thing to read a story, right? But it's something else entirely to see a hero cast in bronze. A statue like this gives a story what historians call an aura of authority. It makes it feel permanent, physical, and totally unquestionable. And the final stamp of approval, literally, came in 1975.
As the country was celebrating its bicentennial, the U.S. Postal Service issued this stamp honoring Sybil as a youthful heroine. I mean, once your face is on a U.S. postage stamp, you are officially part of the national story. For most people, that was it. The legend had become fact.
So this brings us to the final, and maybe the most important question. With so little actual proof, why do we want to believe this story so badly? What gives it such lasting power? You see, the power of this story isn't really about historical accuracy. It's about what it represents. It's the classic American story, isn't it? The underdog, the ordinary person who, when things get tough, rises to the occasion and does something incredible. It's David and Goliath. It's the lone hero. And in this case, it's the teenage girl on a horse, fighting for liberty. As the historian Paula Hunt, who studied this myth a lot, puts it, the story of the lone teenage girl riding for freedom, it seems, is simply too good not to be believed. It's a story of courage and empowerment that just feels like it should be true.
Look, Sybil Ludington was a real person who lived through a revolution, no doubt about that. And yet, her modern fame is built on a legend that the evidence just doesn't back up. And it forces us to ask a really tough question. When it comes to our history and our heroes, what is it that makes a story more powerful and sometimes even more lasting than the truth?